There is a quiet mistake that many people make almost every day, and it does not hurt immediately. It does not alarm. It does not shout. But years later it can end in a diagnosis that changes everything. I have seen this too often in my practice. People who lived carefully, who did not smoke, who tried to eat normally, and still ended up with pancreatic disease that no one expected. And when we start to look deeper, we often find something surprisingly simple. Not exotic toxins, not rare genetics. Something from the kitchen. Something that seemed harmless. Something that was done out of thrift, habit, or even care for the family. Tell me honestly, have you ever reheated yesterday's food and thought, "It's even tastier today"? Many people smile at this moment, because it is familiar. Soup the next day, fried potatoes warmed again, rice from the fridge. It feels normal, even comforting. It reminds of home, of times when nothing was wasted. But here is the uncomfortable truth. The pancreas is an organ that forgives for a long time, and then suddenly stops forgiving. It does not like repeated temperature changes, especially in certain foods. And the most dangerous thing is that the damage accumulates silently. With age, this becomes especially important. After 50, your body is no longer the same as at 30. Enzymes work more slowly, cells regenerate less actively, and the pancreas becomes more sensitive to what you put on your plate. What used to pass unnoticed can now create chronic irritation. I remember one patient, a calm, intelligent man in his early 60s. He lived modestly, cooked at home, never overeating. But he had a habit since youth. He always reheated food. "Why waste it?" he would say, especially rice and meat dishes. Over the years, this habit became automatic. When we later discussed his condition, he said something that stayed with me. "Doctor, I thought I was saving, but I didn't know what I was risking." Science today confirms what clinical experience has been hinting at for years. Some foods, when reheated, change their chemical structure. They form compounds that irritate the digestive system, increase oxidative stress, and in certain conditions may even contribute to processes associated with tumor formation, especially in sensitive organs like the pancreas. And here is what is important. Not all reheated food is equally dangerous. Some are relatively safe. But there are specific types that, when reheated, become significantly more aggressive for your body. Most people have no idea about this difference. That is why I want you to stay with me until the very end. Because the last point I will tell you about is the one that even many doctors overlook, and yet it quietly influences the health of millions of people. Now think for a moment. Look at your usual day. What do you reheat most often? What sits in your refrigerator waiting for later? Sometimes awareness begins with such a simple question, and if you already feel that this topic concerns you personally, support this conversation. Subscribe and like this video so that more people of your age can hear what truly matters for their health, because what follows may change the way you look at your everyday food, and more importantly, the way your body responds to it over time. And when you begin to look more carefully at what exactly ends up being reheated most often, one product almost always appears first. It is simple, affordable, familiar since childhood, and seems completely harmless. Rice. At first glance, rice looks like the safest food possible. Light, neutral, often recommended even for people with digestive issues. Many of you were once told that rice is gentle on the stomach. And this is true, but only when it is freshly prepared. What changes after it sits in the refrigerator and is then reheated is something most people never think about. Cooked rice is an ideal environment for certain bacteria, especially if it was left at room temperature even for a short time before being stored. One of the most studied is Bacillus cereus. It produces toxins that are not destroyed even during reheating. Now imagine this. You cook rice, it cools slowly, then goes into the fridge, and the next day you heat it again. The taste is familiar, nothing alarming. But the chemical and biological composition is already different. These toxins can irritate the intestinal lining, and through repeated exposure they increase the load on the pancreas. Not in one day, not in 1 week, but gradually, like a slow drip. With age, your body becomes less resilient to such repeated irritation. The pancreas begins to react more sharply, even if you do not feel immediate pain. There may be slight bloating, heaviness after eating, fatigue, small signals that are easy to ignore. I once worked with a woman in her late 50s who prided herself on cooking efficiently. She always made a large pot of rice for several days. It was practical, economical, but she also complained of constant discomfort after meals. When we adjusted just one thing, she stopped reheating rice and began preparing smaller portions fresh. Within 2 weeks, her digestion noticeably improved, not because rice is bad, but because the way it was used had changed. There is also a deeper biochemical aspect. When rice cools and is reheated, the structure of its starch changes. Resistant starch forms, which in moderate amounts can be beneficial. But in combination with bacterial toxins and repeated heating cycles, it can create fermentation processes in the gut that indirectly affect pancreatic function. And here is the key point. The pancreas is closely connected to the entire digestive chain. When the intestines are irritated regularly, the pancreas is forced to adapt. Over time, this constant adaptation can become chronic stress for the organ. You do not need to eliminate rice completely. That would be unnecessary and even unreasonable. But there is a small, very practical habit that can protect you. Tomorrow, simply cook less. Prepare only what you plan to eat once. If something remains, cool it quickly and consume it cold in a salad rather than reheating it. Or better yet, do not store it at all. Try this for 7 days. Just observe how your body responds after meals. Sometimes health is not about drastic changes, but about subtle corrections repeated daily. And as you begin to notice these small shifts, a natural question arises. If something as simple as rice can behave this way, what about foods that are heavier, richer, more complex? Because there is one category that people reheat even more often. And it affects the pancreas much more aggressively, although few connect the two. And when you begin to follow this line of thought further, it naturally leads to a product that is present on almost every table, especially where people value satiety and strength. Meat. Fried, baked, stewed, cutlets, sausages. It feels like the foundation of a proper meal, and for many years it truly was. But what happens to meat after it cools, sits, and is then reheated is something your pancreas perceives very differently than you do with your taste. Freshly cooked meat already requires significant work from the digestive system. It stimulates the pancreas to release enzymes in order to break down proteins and fats. This is normal. This is how the body is designed. But when meat is reheated, especially at high temperatures, its structure changes. Fats begin to oxidize. Proteins undergo repeated denaturation. And compounds appear that were not present in the original dish. One of these groups of substances is called advanced glycation end products. You do not need to remember the name. What matters is the effect. These compounds increase inflammation in the body and create additional stress for cells. In younger years, the body can still compensate. After 50, this compensation becomes less reliable. And here is where the pancreas quietly enters the picture again. It reacts to these altered compounds not with immediate pain, but with increased workload. More enzymes, more effort, more strain. Over time, this repeated strain becomes a background process that people rarely notice until something more serious develops. I remember a man who came to me with persistent heaviness after eating. He was disciplined, a former engineer. Everything in his life was structured. He ate meat every day, always home-cooked, always proper food. But he had one habit. He cooked for 3 days ahead and reheated everything thoroughly each time. He believed this made food safer. When we spoke, I asked him a simple question. When do you feel lighter, after freshly cooked food or reheated? He paused, thought, and then said quietly, after fresh, but I never paid attention. We adjusted his routine. No radical diet. Just one change. Meat only freshly prepared or gently warmed once, without repeated cycles. Within 10 days, he noticed that the heaviness decreased. Within a month, his energy improved. This is how subtle but powerful these factors can be. There is also a thermal aspect that many overlook. When meat is reheated at high temperatures, especially in a pan or microwave without moisture, it becomes drier. This dryness makes digestion more difficult. The pancreas has to compensate by producing more enzymes to process this dense, altered food, and over the years, such compensation becomes a burden. Now, I want you to do something simple tomorrow. Not complicated, not extreme. Just observe. If you have a choice between reheated meat and something freshly prepared, choose fresh. If you must reheat, do it gently, with a bit of water, without frying it again. And, most importantly, avoid reheating the same portion multiple times. Try this for at least 7 days. Pay attention not only to your stomach, but to your overall state. Energy after meals, clarity of mind, even your sleep. The pancreas influences more than people think. And now something important. Many people assume that meat is the heaviest challenge for digestion, but there is another category of food that seems lighter, more innocent, even healthy. Yet when reheated, it can disturb the pancreas in a more insidious way. If this information is already making you rethink your habits, take a moment to support it. Subscribe and like. Not for me, but so that more people who quietly follow these routines for years can finally understand what is happening inside their bodies. Because what comes next often surprises even those who consider themselves careful with their diet, and yet repeat the same mistake almost every day. And as this pattern becomes clearer, many people begin to feel a certain confidence. They think, well, I understand now, heavy food, meat, frying, high temperatures, and then they calmly return to something they consider almost lechebnum, something light, something that cannot possibly harm. Vegetables. Boiled, stewed, baked vegetables, especially potatoes, carrots, beets. They seem safe. They are soft, familiar, often recommended even in recovery diets. And this is exactly why the next point is so often overlooked. The issue is not the vegetable itself. It is what happens to certain compounds inside it after cooling and reheating. Take potatoes as an example, one of the most common foods on the table. When cooked and then left to cool, especially if stored improperly, nitrates naturally present in vegetables can begin to convert into nitrites. Upon reheating, especially multiple times, further chemical reactions may occur, forming compounds that irritate the digestive system. You do not feel this immediately. There is no sharp pain, no obvious signal. But the pancreas reacts to these subtle irritants. It becomes more sensitive, more reactive, especially if this is repeated day after day. I once observed a patient who followed what she believed was a perfect light diet. Mostly vegetables, very little fat, everything boiled. But she cooked in large quantities and reheated the same pot for 2 or 3 days. She came to me not with acute pain, but with a constant feeling of fatigue and vague discomfort after meals. When we carefully analyzed her routine, it became clear that the problem was not what she ate, but how she used it over time. We changed only one thing: fresh preparation of vegetables or consumption without reheating. Within 2 weeks, she said something very simple. I feel lighter, as if my body stopped resisting. This is often how the pancreas speaks when it is no longer under quiet pressure. There is also another aspect that deserves your attention. Reheated potatoes, especially fried or baked ones, can accumulate compounds such as acrylamide when exposed again to high heat. This substance has been studied extensively, and although it is associated primarily with frying, repeated heating increases its concentration. Over time, it contributes to oxidative stress in the body. Oxidative stress is a silent process. It does not hurt, but it accelerates cellular wear, including in organs like the pancreas, which are already working at a slower pace with age. And now I want you to notice something in your own kitchen. How often do you reheat potatoes or vegetable dishes? How many times does the same pan go back onto the stove? Sometimes awareness begins not with new knowledge, but with seeing your привычно действия more clearly. You do not need to give up vegetables. On the contrary, they are essential. But the way you handle them determines whether they support your body or quietly burden it. Tomorrow, try a simple adjustment. Cook vegetables in smaller portions. If something remains, eat it cold, for example as part of a salad, or simply do not store it for long. Avoid reheating the same dish more than once. Give your pancreas a small relief and observe how your body responds. 7 days. Just 7 days of this awareness can already show you a difference. And as this understanding deepens, another layer reveals itself. Because there is a type of food that combines everything we have already discussed. starch, fat, processing, and is reheated almost automatically without any thought at all. It is quick, convenient, and deeply rooted in modern habits, and precisely because of this it becomes one of the most underestimated sources of long-term stress for the pancreas. And when all these patterns begin to connect, it becomes clear that the real issue is not one single product, but the combination of convenience and repetition. This is where the next category quietly enters your life: processed ready-made meals, frozen dinners, packaged dishes, pre-cooked cutlets, store-bought casseroles, even yesterday's takeaway carefully placed in the refrigerator for later. They are designed to save time, and for many people after 50, this feels like a reasonable compromise. Less effort, less standing at the stove, more rest. But here is what your body experiences instead of this convenience. These foods are already processed before they even reach your kitchen. They contain stabilizers, preservatives, flavor enhancers. Their structure has already been altered once during production. Then you heat them. Then sometimes you cool them again. And then you reheat. This repeated cycle creates a layered effect. Not just one change, but multiple transformations in the same product. Fats oxidize more intensely. Proteins degrade further. Chemical compounds accumulate, especially when heating is uneven, as often happens in a microwave. The pancreas does not recognize convenience. It only responds to what arrives for digestion. And what arrives after such cycles is something far more complex than fresh food. I recall a man in his late 60s, recently retired. He lived alone and began relying heavily on ready-made meals. They are balanced, he told me. Everything is calculated. On paper, it looked correct, but in reality, he was reheating the same types of food almost daily. He complained not of pain, but of a constant dull fatigue after eating, a kind of heaviness that did not go away. When we replaced even half of these meals with simple, freshly prepared food, something changed. He described it as clarity after eating, something he had not felt for years. There is also an important physiological detail. With age, your pancreas produces enzymes less efficiently. This means that the body becomes more dependent on the quality of food itself. The more distorted the structure of the food, the harder your pancreas has to work to process it. And processed meals, especially reheated ones, are among the most structurally altered foods you can eat. Another factor that is often overlooked is fat quality. Many ready-made dishes contain oils that are stable during initial cooking, but not during repeated heating. These fats break down into compounds that promote inflammation. Again, not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily. And the pancreas is particularly sensitive to this steady, low-level inflammation. Now, I want you to pause and think about your own routine. Not with criticism, but with calm attention. How often do you rely on food that was cooked somewhere else, cooled, stored, and then reheated in your kitchen? Tomorrow, make a small experiment. Replace just one such meal with something simple and fresh. It does not have to be complicated. Even a basic dish prepared and eaten immediately will already reduce the burden on your body. Do this for 7 days. Observe not only digestion, but your general state, energy, mood, even how quickly you feel satisfied after eating. Because often the body responds not with loud signals, but with subtle improvements that are easy to miss unless you are looking for them. And as this picture becomes clearer, one final, very common habit remains. It seems almost harmless, even comforting. Many people associate it with warmth, with routine, with small everyday pleasure. But this last element has a unique effect. It does not overload the pancreas in an obvious way. It changes its environment slowly, almost imperceptibly, and that is exactly why so many people never connect it to deeper problems. This is the point that most people overlook completely. And when we arrive at this last, often unnoticed habit, many people are surprised, because it is not something heavy, not something obviously harmful. On the contrary, it is associated with comfort, warmth, even care for oneself. Soups, broths, and especially those that are reheated again and again over several days. At first, this may sound almost contradictory. For decades, warm soups were considered the foundation of gentle nutrition, and rightly so when they are fresh. A light broth, freshly prepared, can support digestion, reduce negrusku on the pancreas, and create a feeling of calm in the body. But the problem begins when the same pot is reheated repeatedly. Each cycle of cooling and heating changes the composition of the broth. Proteins break down further, fats begin to oxidize, and extractive substances accumulate. These are compounds that give broth its rich taste, but in excess, especially after repeated heating, they become irritating for the digestive system. The pancreas reacts subtly at first, a slight heaviness, a feeling that the body is working after eating rather than resting. Over time, this can turn into chronic tension in the digestive process. I remember a woman, a retired teacher, who took great pride in her cooking. Every week she prepared a large pot of soup for the whole family, even though she lived alone. She reheated it daily, sometimes twice a day. She believed this was the most caring thing she could do for herself. When she came to me, she did not complain of anything severe, just a constant feeling that food no longer brought comfort. "It's strange," she said. "I eat what is supposed to be healthy, but I feel worse." We did not change her entire diet. We changed one habit. She began cooking smaller portions and stopped reheating the same soup multiple times. Within 10 days, she told me, "It feels like my body is finally quiet after eating." There is also a biochemical side that deserves your attention. During repeated heating, especially of broths containing meat or bones, compounds such as purines and oxidized lipids increase. In excess, they can contribute to metabolic stress, including in organs like the pancreas and liver. And here's something even more subtle. When food is reheated many times, it loses not only nutrients but also what we might call digestive clarity. The body spends more effort extracting what it needs, and this constant effort becomes a background burden. With age, this matters more than ever. Your body is no longer designed for excess work. It needs precision, not overload. Now, I want you to try something very simple. Not a restriction, not a diet, just awareness in action. Tomorrow, if you prepare soup or broth, make a smaller portion. Enough for 1 or 2 meals. If something remains, store it properly and reheat it only once, gently, without bringing it again to aggressive boiling. Or even better, allow yourself the habit of fresh preparation more often. Do this for 7 days. Pay attention to the feeling after eating. Not immediately, but 30 minutes later. Is there calm in the body or subtle tension? Because this is how your pancreas communicates with you. Quietly, without drama, but very honestly. And now, when all these elements come together, rice, meat, vegetables, processed meals, broths, a deeper understanding begins to form. It is no longer about individual foods. It is about a pattern, a way of treating food that either supports your body or slowly works against it. There is one final insight that connects everything you have heard. It is simple, but it changes how you see your daily habits completely, and once you understand it, you will never look at reheated food in the same way again. And when you calmly gather everything we have discussed, a very clear picture begins to emerge. Not dramatic, not frightening, but precise. The issue is not food itself. Not rice, not meat, not vegetables, not even soup. The issue is repetition, temperature, and time. Your body, especially after 50, lives by a different rhythm. It no longer tolerates chaos in nutrition as easily as before. It values freshness, stability, and simplicity. And the pancreas, perhaps more than any other organ, depends on this stability. Every time food is cooled, stored, and reheated, it changes a little. Then again, and again. You do not see these changes. You only taste what seems familiar. But your body senses something else entirely. It recognizes altered structures, oxidized fats, accumulated compounds, and it responds. Not with pain at first, that would be too easy. It responds with quiet effort, with increased enzyme production, with subtle inflammation, with fatigue that you may attribute to age, to weather, to anything but food. And this is where many people lose precious time. I want to tell you something important, something that comes not from theory, but from years of observing patients. The pancreas rarely becomes ill suddenly. It almost always sends small signals long before. But these signals are soft. They require attention, a slight heaviness after meals, a feeling that food sits longer than before, a decrease in energy not immediately but later in the day. These are not random. These are messages. And now you already understand something that many overlook. It is not enough to choose healthy products. It is equally important how you treat them over time. Freshly prepared food is not a luxury. It is a form of respect for your body. And here is the insight that changes everything. The pancreas does not need perfection. It needs consistency and care. If most of your meals are fresh, if reheating is rare and gentle, if food is not subjected to repeated cycles, your body begins to recover its natural balance. I have seen this many times. People do not change everything. They simply reduce the number of reheating cycles. They begin to cook a little less, a little more often. They become attentive. And within weeks, they notice something unexpected. Lightness after eating. Clearer thinking. More stable energy. Not because of a miracle, but because the body is no longer constantly compensating. And now I want you to take this seriously, but calmly. Not with fear, but with awareness. Starting tomorrow, do one simple thing. Before reheating any food, pause for a moment and ask yourself, can I eat this fresh instead? If yes, choose fresh. If not, reheat gently, only once, and avoid returning the same dish to the stove again. Do this for 7 days. Just 7 days of conscious attention. You will feel the difference. Not because someone told you, but because your own body will respond. And if this conversation has helped you see your habits differently, support it so that others can also protect their health in time. Subscribe and like this video, and share it with someone who still believes that reheating food is always harmless. Because sometimes the most dangerous habits are the ones that feel the most familiar. Take care of your body with quiet respect. It remembers everything you do for it, and it always responds.